Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about The Tale of Hilltop Farm, which is the first in the cottage tales of Beatrix Potter by Susan Wittig Albert. I actually read the fourth or the fifth book, I forget which one, The Tale of Briarbank, first, because I found it at a free little library and it sounded wild and interesting. But then I loved it because it was both super unhinged but also gorgeous and amazing. Um, and I loved it so much I wanted to read the rest of the series. My partner got me them all. So this is the first one in the series. Couple things. I guess first of all, this is going to be kind of a spoiler-heavy video, so don't watch it if you don't want a bunch of spoilers, because I'm going to give some kind of pretty quickly. Um, so first of all, this book overall was both much less unhinged than the other one, but also not nearly as good. So like it was more logically written, but also much more boring. And the other one was like a lot of fun and also incredibly written. And this one has some moments, but I actually feel like she sort of was finding how she wanted to go as she was writing it, because about halfway through the book, her writing really picks up and becomes much richer and more gorgeous as the book goes on. So I almost feel like she was figuring it out as she was going. It gives me that vibe. Okay, one thing about this book is that it is a Berkeley prime crime mystery, which makes you think that it's going to be a cozy mystery because it's listed as mystery. Understand, here's the spoiler. Understand, in both this book and the other book, nobody's murdered. In both books, somebody dies, and there's a little suspicion where people are like, oh, were they murdered? And then you find out, no, they weren't murdered. Like an accident happened in both cases. Um, that's not really, that's not really a prime crime mystery. um, so that kind of threw me off. There are some mysteries, just like in the other one. In this one, a church rectory goes missing, some money goes missing for the school roof fund, and like an important painting goes missing. The answers to where all those went are silly. Um, so, yeah, there's no real nefarious things happening here. The most nefarious thing that happens is that the teacher's like kind of losing it, and she is like abusive to this kid. Um, and also there's like a painting burglar. It's not very crimey at all. Um, yeah, parts of this were kind of boring. There were some weird long tangents. There was a moment where she kind of went on a tangent about like the sexism against women learning how to bicycle, or like cycling culture during this time period, which it was cool. I agreed with it, but it was sort of a tangent. Um, Also, the other book in this series that I read had this really amazing, but wild, but amazing thing where she would repeatedly put you as a reader into the book. Like you were within the world, and she would say like, oh, we're just going to hide here behind this shelf so we can watch this next conversation. Or she would say things like, right when a conversation was getting to a cool, interesting part and you were ready for the next reveal, she would say, you know, while this conversation is really interesting, if we don't go over to this other person's house right now, we're going to miss an important piece of what they're saying in their conversation. And so you would leave one place and go to another place. So you were, as the reader, were like within the book. That's not present in this book at all. So I'm interested to see, I have the whole series now, I'm interested to see where she introduces that. And the choice to introduce that when it wasn't in the first book is, again, really wild to me. So that's interesting. There was also no weird fantasy in this book. In the other book, there was a dragon. This is, obviously it's still kind of crazy because the animals can like talk to each other, but it's much more based in reality. Okay, so the plot. I'm going to explain the plot. So this series is wild. It is a series where the main character of the series is supposed to be Beatrix Potter, like the author that wrote Peter Rabbit. Beatrix Potter. And the whole series takes place in between the time after her first husband dies, as she's buying the house that she ends up living in later in her life, um, in like this small little country village in England, and but before she marries her next husband. So it's this window where she was truly finding her independence. Um, and the book talks a lot. It's very well researched, like incredibly well researched, and it talks a lot about um, the relationship she had with her parents, who were super controlling, and it was kind of the style at the time in the upper class societies to if you had a daughter, at least one of your daughters was going to basically be a spinster and act as your servant until you die, and you would be very controlling to that daughter and not let her do anything or go anywhere, um, and that was very much Beatrix's reality, and so she's sort of pushing back and escaping that, and her writing that financial freedom of selling those children's books is really what allowed her to escape that. So that's a big part of the plot. It's her. She's striking out on her own. She just bought this weird farm. She doesn't know anything about farming. She's like a upper class city girl, but she's trying to strike it out in the countryside, and the country town folk are kind of like judgmental of her, like she doesn't know what she's doing, and she's high class and all this stuff. So anyway, so she's the main character. So she gets there, she's kind of scoping out this new property that she has, and somebody dies, and the whole town is abuzz, like, was it poisoning, was it not poisoning, they don't know. That person who dies, she leaves her entire property to a total unknown outsider who isn't from the town, that no one's ever heard of, and so everyone's kind of confused why she left it to her, and that casts some suspicion. Then there's this weird relative, like a nephew, that thought he was going to get left all the property, and he wasn't, and he's very disgruntled about it, so that's like, there's some mystery there. Did he maybe poison her? We don't know. And then things in the town start to go missing. So church rectory goes missing. There's a school. It's like a one-room schoolhouse type of deal. And they're grossly underfunded. And they had this little collection going for the school roof, and the school roof fund is missing. And then also a very important and expensive painting that was part of the estate of the woman who died also goes missing. So you have three missing things: the rectory, the school roof fund money, and the painting. And so a big part of the plot is just figuring out where these things went, who took them. And so as the book goes on, we find out that the woman who Miss Tolliver, the dead person, left her entire estate to is like her long lost daughter. We don't find that until the very end. But so that's why she ended up with it. So there's no murder, foul play there. The disgruntled nephew also didn't murder her. He was upset that he didn't get the property in the estate, and he did steal the painting and try and sell it on the black market. So that explains that missing painting mystery. And then the rectory and the money are somewhat related. So, meanwhile, there's this little side plot that's going on where there is a very abusive teacher at this school. And there's actually a lot of commentary in this book about schooling that I really enjoyed. Like, as a teacher, I really liked some of the commentary about schooling, and that was a major theme in the book. Both, like, the chronic underfunding of schools. There's a lot of lines about just, like, things are broken and not working in the school, and nobody seems to really care enough. But then also the cruelty of schools, and they really, you have this one teacher who's really embodying it. She's starting to lose her mind a little bit, so she's even more abusive than she normally would be, but you kind of get a sense that she was already pretty abusive. She blames this little boy for stealing the school roof money, even though it's very clear that it wasn't him. It's just not his personality at all, so she blames him. She tries to get him arrested. She's like screaming at him, very abusive. So she's definitely like sort of holding the main narrative of schools are abusive, but then there's these other little ways in which the everyday common abuse of schools is hinted at. So like, for example, they say the students will receive their first lessons in reading, writing, and sitting still. And then there's all these different lines about the kids being afraid all the time and hating school. And I think that's like a reality that we don't talk about enough, which is just that a lot of teachers are really abusive, and also school just, it often really sucks. It shouldn't, but it does. So anyway, we find out that the money wasn't stolen by the little boy. It was actually stolen by some rats, and they're like gambling with it. Rats that live in the school. That plotline made no sense at all. What would rats have to, like, why would they want money? They don't buy things. They don't, in this reality, they don't purchase things. There's not little rat stores where they buy. It made no, literally it made no sense. And they really wanted this money. And I'm just like, why? Okay, weird. Okay, so that explains both the painting, and then now we know where the school roof fund went. The last thing is the church rectory, and the teacher who was kind of losing it stole it just because she was kind of losing it. So that was the answer to the 3 mysteries. Yeah, just nothing really sinister happening there. The teacher who was abusive, the animals bands together to try and stop her from arresting this little boy. And one of the cats, who is the cat of the teacher who's losing it, the cat climbs up the stairs and plants himself on the steps so that she trips, falls down the stairs, and breaks her leg in the most hideous way. She breaks her leg. They keep saying it in the book. She breaks her leg above the knee. When I think about that's like a thigh break. That is the most hideous thing I could imagine, an above the knee bone break. And the way they handle it in this book is like everyone is so overjoyed, and everyone's so proud of Max, who's the cat who broke her leg, and everyone's so happy. And even the humans in the book are like, yes, awesome, she won't go after that little boy now that her thigh's freaking broken. And it was pretty funny. I was laughing out loud at how that was dealt with because it was wild. Anyway, so that's the basic plot of the book. All right. Let's see, some other things I wanted to talk about. Oh, there were some cool little hints about like the world's building and like what the world is like for the animals that I liked to kind of give you an idea of like what you have these different characters. You have the human characters, and then the animals also talk, and they sort of run their own little plots and parts of the mystery. But she gives you little hints of like how big their world is, even though you don't spend too much time on the vastness of it. You mostly focus in on certain animals. But towards the beginning, so the woman dies, right? And this cat feels like she has to tell the bees, let the bees know that live on the property that she's died. So she says, that done, she hurried round to the back of Anvil Cottage, where Miss Tolliver kept 2 hives of bees, to tell them the news of their mistress's passing. It was always good practice to tell the hive courteously and with respect for their feelings, so that the bees did not decline and die in sympathy with the departed, or take offense and fly off in search of new quarters. First of all, it's gorgeously written, but also I just thought it was like, I really feel like Susan Wittig Albert, and I'll talk about this a little bit later too, like, I feel like she's really like an animal liberation person, or cares a lot about animal welfare, because the care that she spends with every little living creature is really impressive. Okay, I just want to talk about the writing a little bit, because just like with the first book that I read, just this woman can write her ass off. It's actually incredible. And this book didn't have as much gorgeous writing, but it still had a ton. So I'll just read some of my favorite passages. I have 3. Okay, so the first one. The orchard buzzed and hummed and droned as if it were alive. as it was, alive with drunken insects feasting in giddy pleasure on the wine-sweet apples that lay fermenting in the grass. Just gorgeous. Another one that I have. Well, this is a quick little line, but it shows both her writing skill, but also like her ability to do character building. And so this part she's talking about a really stern person, she says. Bertha's tongue was a law unto itself. Great. I just feel like I know a lot more about the character there, and it's just gorgeously written. It's a cool way to say that. And then the last page, there's actually two quotes on the same page that I want to read. Okay. Here the night air was scented with meadow sweet and wild thyme, and the field seemed very still under the silent moon, which flickered as cloud shapes passed over it. And then a little bit later, and then it resolved itself with a flutter of heavy wings and a rasp of claws into the dark shape of an owl settling onto the limb of a willow beside the beck. The flat round disk of his large face was ghostly in the moonlight, his staring eyes wild and fiercely luminous. He was annoyed. It's funny, even though this book didn't have the fantasy elements of the other one in the series, the way that some of the writing is done, it gives me like fantasy vibes because it's so much like animal world building and scene world building. It's gorgeous. Yeah, this book's super well researched, and the amount of research you had to do was a lot because you have like Beatrix Potter's biography, right? So there's that. But then all the behaviors of the animals and what animals were like indigenous to that area or would be in that area. But then also like what the town would actually be like in that area at that time. And then also like what it's like for people at the time. So they talk a lot about how she talks a lot about how marriage at that time period was kind of an escape for women, which was interesting thought to me because I am pretty critical of like marriages that I read about in the past where I'm like, well, you didn't like that person at all, but it kind of gave me a new perspective on it. It's like, okay, if you're in a situation where you're basically, just serving your parents and you're not allowed to go anywhere or do anything and you have no financial freedom, a marriage would be a way out of that. So that was interesting. Couple criticisms I had with the book. The dog was weirdly sexist and thought women belonged in the kitchen. That doesn't make any sense. Why would a dog have that opinion? All the cats were women again. I don't know why we decided that cats are girls and dogs are boys. They're the same as people. 50% of dogs and cats are both men and women. There was a comment about some woman, description of her about how long her lashes was. And it's a pet peeve of mine that as a society we think women have longer eyelashes than men. They don't. But I do think she did a little bit better with the sexism this time around than she did last time because she tried to balance some of the behaviors of the men and women. So, for example, the men gossip a lot in this book, which I thought was pretty great. And they kind of act like they don't. They kind of like roll their eyes at the women for gossiping, but then they do a ton of gossiping, so I like that. The last issue I had with this book was there was a lot of fat phobia in the book and just like body shaming. If I had to say like the biggest theme from this book, or like the thesis almost, was this idea of like changing dynamics in a crisis, or like crisis is a moment of possibility. So there are several events that happen in the book, both the death of the main character, the fact that Beatrix's ex-husband died, who she was very much in love with, the fact that this woman is starting to lose her mind as teacher, the fact that this kid is getting bullied by the teacher. All of these different characters are in a moment of crisis, and they use that moment of crisis to change something drastically about their lives. And that was really powerful. It's like, this horrible thing has happened, and I am going to completely shift the way that I'm living my life, and take that as an opportunity. And I thought that was the biggest theme in this book, that I came away with it. There were some sort of mini themes that I think some of them were present in the other book too. One is like just the animal liberation sense that you get from the book. There was some commentary on fox hunting and the cruelty of fox hunting. There was lots of descriptions of animals that we normally see in servitude or enslavement, like cows. There were just long descriptions of them freely moving throughout space and enjoying living, which I thought was really powerful. There was the school commentary. I talked about that a little bit. But I thought that was really well done. There was also a part with the school that was kind of like a class commentary, which I thought was really great. So you had these 3 people that work at the school. One of them is the woman who's super abusive. Then there's another teacher who's really kind, but she's earning her living, and it's a somewhat decent living as a teacher there, so she's afraid to say anything. And then you have a lower level employee who's really like a custodian, and she's responsible for cleaning everything. And she is not afraid to speak up because she financially has nothing to lose. Like, she's barely able to make her bills anyway. And so she's kind of like, whatever, what are you going to do? Fire me? Like, it will make me no worse off than I was. And by virtue of that, she feels able to and empowered to speak up about the abuse of the other teacher. And meanwhile, the teacher who's being paid well and who's disturbed by the abusive teacher says nothing. And there's actually a little line about it. And it just made me think of, I don't know why I connected it with Hamlet, like, thus, I forget what it is, thus death makes cowards of us all, or whatever it is. Like, I forget what the line is, but Hamlet's like, because I don't know for sure that there's a heaven, I don't want to commit suicide, so that makes me a coward, because I want to do this thing, but I'm afraid because of this uncertainty. And it's different, but I feel like it's like a thus wages make cowards of us all, because it's like, when your livelihood depends on you being okay with or turning the other way in the face of abuse or oppression, then you're more likely to do that. And in a sick sense, the poverty is almost like a form of freedom, because you got nothing to lose, you're suffering anyway. So that was really interesting. And I think that's really it. That's all I wanted to say. The only other thing is that I really thought it was cool to see Beatrix's character change throughout the course of the book. She starts out feeling very kind of like meek and nervous that she has left her parents to go on this excursion to see the new property. And then she kind of gets a sense of like bravery and I'm going to be strong. And then that shifts into her feeling like she's not brave enough because she's crying and sad and scared at some of the different points in the book. And then finally it shifts to, well, I am sad and scared, and also I'm going to be brave and do the things I want to do anyway while being sad and scared. And that ending place, that arc, I thought was really amazing, and I related to it a lot. So yeah, I guess I'm going to read the second one, even though I thought this was a little boring. But I'm just like invested enough that I want to see like how this series develops. All right, that's all. Bye, everybody.